Hello,
Hello,
nice to meet you.
nice meeting you too. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm also good.
Good. So, where are you?
I'm right now in Germany,
Okay,
but I'm Polish.
Polish. Okay, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. So, what are you doing? Do you live in Germany now, or?
Yes, almost 7 years.
Okay, okay. And you've got a little YouTube channel. Is that what this is for?
Yes.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, I'm happy to start talking anytime you'd like.
You are. I have a question from a friend. He loves your episode. He loves the episode you wrote for Justice League Unlimited, uh, for the for the man who has everything. And he asked, when writing it, do did you felt a bit of anxiety, because Alan Moore has been quite strictly about putting his name on adaptations of his work, and as far as he can remember, that episode is the only time Alan Moore is credited for the original story that it's based on.
Yeah, as far as I know, that's true. I wasn't very anxious about it on that level because strangely enough, I had never read the story before they asked me to adapt it. So I wasn't, it has this great mythic stature now. Oh, it's for the man who has everything. It's Alan Moore's great story. I didn't know anything about it. So they sent me the book. I gave it a read. I thought, oh, that's a really fun story. Let's do it. And we just worked on it. I think if I had been aware that it was so revered, then I would have had some anxiety about it. The only anxiety I really had about that project was it was my first episode of Justice League Unlimited, so I wanted to do well. I wanted to please them, and it turned out very well. So I was very happy with the whole thing, and I'm delighted if it's true that that Alan Moore actually enjoyed the adaptation. So that's a great thing.
Uh, that's awesome. Um, oh, what drove you to become a writer?
That's a great question. What drove me to become a writer? Well, here's the thing. I was always creative from the time I was a little kid. It's just who I am. I always joke, and I'm only half joking when I said God didn't make me very good at very many things, but I was always creative. I spent a good part of my childhood just drawing. Art was my first love, a lot of drawing in my life. And then when I was maybe fifth or sixth grade, I also got into music. I learned to play the guitar. I started playing in bands and writing songs. And I always had a facility for writing. Writing was always something that came naturally to me. So I would bounce back and forth between the art, the music, the writing. And at a certain point, after playing music for a lot of years, at the same time, I started doing rock and roll journalism, doing reviews of records and concerts and interviews and things like that, which was a nice bridge between my writing and my musical selves. But I always loved comics, and one of the things I was interested in doing was writing for comics. At that point, I didn't think my drawing skills were quite up to snuff that I could have become a comic book artist. Although I think what an amazing thing that if you can write and draw, it's an extraordinary combination of talents. But the background in drawing helps my visual sense. As someone who began as an artist, I see things very visually. So at one point, I was writing for journalism. I was writing short stories. I was sending samples into Marvel and DC, and then my band broke up at a certain point, and my writing career took off, and I started selling stories to DC, and the writing just took over, and I'm so glad that it did.
What you prefer, write comics, novels, short stories, or movies, TV?
That's another excellent question. And really the way I feel is that I love story, period. I love telling stories. If I'm telling that story in a comic book, if I'm telling that story in a prose piece, I just had a novella that came out last year, and I have a new one coming out probably in the summer. Whether it's TV, film, whatever it is, As long as it's a vehicle for a really great story, I'm happy. So I'm happy switching through all of those. And that's what I've done through my career, is just move back and forth between all these different media. And also even within comics, switching back and forth through different genres and different styles, all in search of just telling a great story.
Yeah. To be honest, I haven't read many of your comics, but I watched some of your movies that you wrote. Uh, Superman Red Sun, for example, or Constantine City of Demons, but that was a series at first, wasn't
Well,
it?
it was done as a series of episodes first, but when it was originally written, it was written as a full-length film. They cut it down to the episodes, and then with all the extra footage, they put it together back into a movie, because there were things that were not in the TV thing that ended up in the movie.
Yeah, the TV thing also felt like it was just scenes from the movie cut. Uh,
In some ways it was, yeah. In some ways it was. I really loved working on that movie, and I was really, really happy with the way it turned out. I feel like it was very, very true to Constantine.
it is one of my favorite movies, period.
So you're
Uh,
really more of a fan of the animation work than you are of the comic book work, then.
yes, I'm actually pretty new in when it goes to comics. I started reading a few years ago, and I'm
Hmm.
watching still since I was a young kid.
I see. I see. Okay.
Comic
So what,
books are a bit expensive.
right. So what else would you like to know?
Uh, what drew you to make a Constantine movie and using Hellblazer all his engines as a main inspiration?
Well, that, you know, in the end, those decisions are not mine. What happens is the phone rings and it's somebody from Warner Brothers. Um, and they say, we would like you to work on a Constantine movie. And we talked it over, and they wanted to use all his engines, which again, I had never read before, as the basis for that movie. What was fun about working on that was the fact that all his engines is a great story. There's tons of great material there, but they gave me the freedom to use that sort of as a foundation and build on that. So there's all kinds of elements, as you know, if you've read, I don't know if you've ever read the comic, there's all kinds of elements in the movie that are not in the graphic novel, things that I added myself, things, some of which I pulled out of my own work. I was writing Justice League Dark at the time, so I took some things from my Justice League Dark series and brought it into the movie, and then created a lot of new things for the movie. So it was a nice fusion of the original story, which was great, and then a lot of my own original stuff, which we added to it, and also because the movie was rated R, it was very adult. It was very true to the Constantine Hellblazer comics, and David Goyer, who very well known screenwriter and producer, who did the Constantine TV show, was the producer, one of the producers on the animated movie. And he told me that, you know, he said, I basically something to the effect of, I wish we had this story when we did the TV show. He really, really, which made me happy, really appreciated the work that I did on that, which was a great compliment coming from him.
Yeah, it's a great movie. I
Thank
try to
you.
watch it once every day, every year.
Really. It's very dark, but even with the darkness, I tried to bring some positivity out by the end, something, you know, about the friendship and love and sacrifice. Because my feeling is, if you're just gonna dwell in the darkness, you're doing a disservice to your audience. You have to bring something positive out of all that darkness.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. And yes, it's pretty true to Constantine. When it goes to Constantine, I'm a big fan of. It's my
Yeah,
favorite. It's my favorite DC character. And I read not all the comics, but all of his engines. Yes, I read it.
yeah, it was a great one. And then Leonardo Manco did the art for that, which was just the art was just beautiful, beautiful. Love his work. Love his work.
Um, yeah. How did you come up with idea of creature commandos?
Oh, That you know about, huh? It's a funny thing. The Creature Commandos was something that came up very early in my career. And now I realize everyone's going to be asking me about this forever because of what James Gunn is doing with it. Um, Back when I started in comics, DC had a series of books. They were anthology books. They were called mystery books, but they were really horror comics. Weird War Tales, House of Secrets, House of Mystery, probably 20 other things with weird in the title, you know? And that was how new writers broke in. That's how you learned your craft. You would write these little stories that were 5, 6, 7, 8 pages long. And so that's where I sold my first comic book scripts, was to Paul Levitz at DC Comics for House of Mystery. And one of the comics that I was selling to was Weird War Tales. And it was within the first 6 months that I started selling comics to them, selling stories to them, that you're always looking for what's the next story. And I looked at the title, it's called Weird War. So I thought, no brainer, classic monsters fighting World War II. So I came up with this idea. And then what happened is around that same time, DC had something which has become known as the DC implosion, where they cut, like, I don't know, 2/3 of their line. 2/3 of the line was canceled. All the new people that had just started working with them, like me, got no work. I didn't get any work from them for like 10 months. And then when I started working for them again, one of the people I started working with was the great Len Wein. Len, creator of Swamp Thing, Wolverine, also a fantastic editor, and a great friend. Or he became a great friend as we got to work together. And Len was editing Weird War Tales, and he said, I want to put a regular ongoing series into this otherwise anthology book. And I went, oh, I have an idea. And I pulled out that idea that I had from the year before, and Len liked it, and we were off. And that was how Creature Commandos came about. So it's a complete shock to me, all these years later, to see these characters and this concept dusted off and being presented in its own animated series with talk of it moving over to live action. So it's pretty cool.
Yes, I agree. I knew about about the team a bit before Gunn announced it as serious from the DC Nation shorts.
Right. They did a few shorts. That's right. They did one recently, like within the past 2 years. They did a Sergeant Rock Creature Commandos short. That was actually quite good. Quite good. Yeah. So it's fun for me to see, literally from the very, very beginning of my career, and here they are all these years later popping up on TV. That's great.
That was my next question. How do you feel about it?
I'm delighted. You're always delighted when you see things that you've done get adapted into other media, especially when they pay you for it.
Did you know that Gunn will use Creature Commandos before?
No, it was a complete surprise to me. Complete surprise to me. The day before they made the announcement, I guess they had a press event the day before, and someone I know who was a journalist called me up and said, or emailed me and told me what they were doing, and I was like, what? So the day of, it wasn't a surprise, but I'd only found out literally the day before.
Okay, yeah. And if I'm correct, they are also using your Buster Gold run for inspiration for the TV series.
See, I don't know. A lot of these times I don't know these things until they happen. It's like sometimes things pop up and it's like, or I'll see that I get thanked in a movie. I heard someone tells me, oh, they thanked you in that movie before I've seen the movie. So I don't know what of mine they've used in the movie. So it's not like, it's not like 6 months or a year before someone from DC or Marvel calls up and says, oh, by the way, we're using such and such. Now I know they're making a Kraven the Hunter movie. I'm assuming they're using elements from Kraven's Last Hunt in that movie, but I don't know for sure because I don't know anything about it. I've never seen the script and no one has spoken to me about it. So in the end, it's always a surprise for me.
Okay, I thought they are informing the creators that they do.
Nah, maybe sometimes, but for the most part, no. Mm-mm.
Okay. Speaking about Kraven's Last Hunt, how did you come up with the idea for this story?
It was a story that I'd been living with, for 3 4 years before I actually did that, maybe more before I actually did the Craven story. I originally conceived of it as a Batman story, actually two different Batman stories. That for one reason or another never happened. I played with the idea of doing a Doctor Strange story. I was obsessed with this idea of the hero buried alive and coming back from the grave, having missed a period of his life while he's in this state simulating death. And eventually, tumbled on the idea of the villain imitating the hero. So each time I would play with the story idea, it would evolve some more. And Marvel invited me. I'd already worked on the Marvel team up for Marvel, and they invited me to come back and work on Spider-Man. And I said, finally, after playing with this idea for 4 years and having be rejected, what happens as a writer, sometimes, you have an idea, you get rejected, you take it away, you work on it some more, you pitch it again, you get rejected, you go off, you work on it some more. And I always say the story knows what it needs and what it wants. And that story all along had to be that Spider-Man Craven story. So I'm glad it was rejected before, because it allowed me to do it within the framework of Peter Parker and Craven, and it was the perfect story. And so I pitched it to Marvel. They loved it. I got the great Mike Zeck, one of the best artists to ever work at Marvel or in comics in period. And to my great delight, it's one of those stories that's lived on for so many years that they keep reprinting and reprinting and reprinting. And people are discovering it for the first time now. I go to conventions and people say, I just read that last week for the first time. And it's like, what a great thing, all these years later.
Yeah, for sure. Speaking of Spider-Man, you wrote some Spider-Man Batman crossovers for DC and for Marvel.
Yes. I think I'm the only person that's probably done it for both companies. First, I did a Spider-Man Batman for Marvel, which the first time the characters met, and it involved, if I'm remembering correctly, the Joker and Carnage. And then maybe a year later, DC called me up and said, well, we want to do Batman Spider-Man. So I got to write that one too. And that involved Kingpin and Ra's al Ghul. So, I mean, to get to ask to do one of those was a thrill. To get to do both of those was amazing. Just amazing.
Yeah, I can, I understand.
Most of us that work in comics and animation, we're fans of these characters. I grew up reading comics, loving comics. So there's always some little 10-year-old in the back of my head going, Batman, I'm getting to write a story with Batman and Spider-Man. And that little 10-year-old is just in ecstasy, is thrilled beyond belief, So yeah, I never take it for granted. And it's always a kick when I get to work with these characters that I love so much.
Yeah, that's really amazing.
It is.
You wrote 2 Batman movies. It was Batman versus Robin and Bad Blood.
Yes.
Yes. If I remember correctly, you said you would like also do some based on your own comic arcs.
There's one, first of all, I enjoyed working on those 2 movies. I like them both, but I especially enjoyed working on Batman versus Robin. That one really just clicked for me in a really great way. And it turned out to be a really good film. Well, they both turned out to be good films. But I did a story, a Batman story for Legends of the Dark Knight called Going Sane. It's a Batman Joker story. It actually grew out of the original ideas that when I said I originally pitched Craven as a Batman story, there were elements in that story that never got to the Craven story that I held on to for like another 10 years. And I developed this story called Going Sane. And Going Sane, the Joker thinks that he's finally won. He's finally killed Batman. Batman gets blown up in this cabin. Body is like his ribs are sticking out. He's broken. He's mangled. The Joker thinks he's dead. He kicks him into the river. He gets swept away. And so he's fulfilled his life's dream and his mind snaps. Now, if you or I, if our mind snaps, we go insane. The Joker's already insane. His mind snapped and he went sane. So he creates this persona for himself of this meek, sweet little man. And it's the story of the Joker in this new identity. And he meets a woman and he falls in love. And meanwhile, of course, we discover that Batman is not dead, but he's been washed away to this upstate town where he's nurtured back to health by this female doctor, and they have a relationship. And then what happens when Batman and the Joker finally come together again at the end? And I think it's really one of the best superhero stories that I've ever done, and I think it would make a fantastic animated movie. And the other one that I think would make a fantastic animated movie is an Elseworlds that I did called Speeding Bullets, which mixed up the Superman and Batman mythos. So what happens in the story is the rocket lands from Krypton, but it's not found by the Kents. It's found by the Wayne family. And so the baby is adopted and he becomes not Clark Kent, but Bruce Wayne, witnesses his parents' murder. His powers kick in, and Kal-El from Krypton becomes Batman. And what happens when he suffers that trauma of the loss of his parents and eventually becomes a superpowered Batman? It's a pretty cool story. And again, I think it would make a really cool movie.
Yes, definitely. Hopefully, you get, when they want to do those, you get the chance to write them yourself.
Yeah, those I would very much like to write. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd love to write either of those. Yeah.
What is your favorite movie that you wrote?
Well, I'll go through all the anime. I've worked on so much fun stuff. I mean, the first series that I wrote for was Justice League Unlimited, which has gone on to be a classic show. So grateful that was my door in. I think I'll go through all of the TV shows. I really enjoyed them all. I loved working on Justice League, but I worked on a show called Batman: The Brave and the Bold. I wrote 8 episodes of that show, and it was so much fun because it was written for a very broad audience. I always say, people come up to me, adults say, "Oh, I watched that show with my son, and we both loved it." It's the much more in the spirit of the old kind of '60s fun Batman, but it involved so many characters from the DC universe. So I got to write all these different characters. I worked on a book called Justice League International for years, and we got to bring those characters in. It was just a fun show. I really loved working for that show. In terms of the movies, I think the Constantine movie may be my favorite out of all of them that I've done. I really enjoyed working on that. I was given a lot of freedom. It was very well received. And there's another project which wasn't a full-length movie, but it was a short, and it was Neil Gaiman's Death character.
Yes.
That just came out a couple of years ago, and I loved working on that. The director, his name is Sam Liu. He came up with the basic idea. I worked with Sam and Jim Krieg, the producer. We created this story that really was meaningful to all of us. And I thought it was just a perfect little story and a really beautiful translation of that character. And I'm very, very proud of that. A really very special project.
I need to say it's my favorite short from.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. The first time I watched it, I rewatched it the same day like 6 times.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. I'm a big fan of this. I don't know if you're familiar with the Twilight Zone. Do you know the Twilight Zone?
Yes.
Okay, the original old black and white show. And I thought that depth short was almost like a great little, 20-minute Twilight Zone episode. It wasn't involved in a giant mythology. It was very personal. It was very human. It was very spooky and eerie. And it had a beginning, a middle, and end. And it had something of value to say, So I'm glad you liked it, because that story meant a lot to all of us that worked on it. We all kind of poured our hearts into it. When I said to you that as a kid, I spent most of my time, on the floor drawing, you look in that short, and one of the first things you see is him as a little kid on the floor drawing. That comes directly from my life. The teachers that are sort of degrading him when he's in art school, it's not exactly the same for me. But I know growing up, I ran into my share of teachers who tried to dissuade me from doing the things that I loved. So that went in there, So it was very personal for me. It was personal for Sam. It was personal for Jim, and it turned out really, really well. So I'm really grateful that you liked it that much.
Yeah, it was a blast.
Right.
How was the idea born for the Adam Strange short?
Now that one, that idea came from the director. On that one, the director came up with the basic story. Butch, oh God, I'm always going to screw up his last name. Butch Lucic? Yeah. Butch Lucic. I think that's right.
I don't know either how to spell his last name.
Right, right. I think it's Lucick, Lucic. I think that's what it is. Anyway, very talented guy. He's directed a lot of their stuff. And that was that. I think that was his passion project, that story. So I was basically hired to take his idea and flesh it out and write it into the short. And it turned. I just rewatched it recently, and I hadn't seen it since we originally did it. And it was a lot of fun. It was kind of a very different take on Adam Strange, a little darker take on it, because Adam Strange, back in the original comics, it was a very sort of bright, shiny kind of character and world. And this was a little bit darker, but that I give a lot of the credit to the director, because it was really his passion project and his idea.
And then later on, they brought exactly the same Adam Strange into the new Green Lantern movie.
Oh, they did. Oh, great. Oh, the same carried over continuity wise. Oh, that's great. I'll have to see if I can find that online and watch it. Yeah. Is that the Jon Stewart one?
Yes.
Okay, I will. I'm always looking for. I work out on the treadmill every day, so I'm always looking for something to watch while I'm on the treadmill. So that'll be my next watch.
Yeah, have fun with it.
I will. I love Green Lantern as a character that I love in all his incarnations.
Now, come back to Constantine. Do you have a favorite comic arc from? Yeah.
All right, I'm going to be really honest with you. I haven't read a ton of the Constantine comics. I remember him from his earliest appearances in Swamp Thing. And then what happened was I got hired to write Justice League Dark, the comic book. And Constantine was the central character in that book. So that's when I really educated myself about Constantine. So I don't have a favorite arc because I haven't read enough of the original comics, but I had to read through all of the Justice League Dark stuff. And so I don't have a favorite arc because I haven't read enough. Sometimes, you get hired for these things, and what you do is you read about the character, you look up things, you educate yourself, but you don't necessarily have time to read every comic that ever was. Just for Justice League Dark, I had to reread that whole run so I could step in and see who Constantine was in the context of that series. And then, of course, with all his engines, I read that, and then I had to refer back to the early stories. And then you go to Wikipedia and you read all about the character. That's where I came across the business about the demon and the little girl, that Constantine had failed and she gets sucked into hell, and it haunts him for the rest of his life. And I said, that needs to be in this movie, because it was such an emotionally powerful thing, what he went through and what he lost and the guilt that he had over that. You're always looking for ways to humanize these characters, to make them relatable, to make the audience care about them. And a lot of the way, Constantine, his line is always like, oh, he's just a hard person. He's a bastard. He's this, he's that. But of course, he's not just that. He's a human being underneath that, with a heart and a soul. So it's always that balance between that kind of tough outer core of who Constantine is and a real human heart and soul. And that story with the little girl, really helped to bring that out. And then him having to save Chaz's daughter. In the graphic novel, it was Chaz's granddaughter. And I just thought the audience for this is not going to relate to two guys, one of whom's a grandfather now already. You know what I mean? So I wanted to make them younger. I wanted to make them younger and have it be Chaz's daughter instead of his granddaughter. Made more sense to me.
For me, it makes also more sense. And yeah, Constantine, I see Constantine as the bastard. That's his shell. He shows that to people, but he's not really all that.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly how I feel. Yeah. And that's what that movie was about. His relationship with Chaz. These are two guys that grew up together that love each other. So this, without giving too much away, that we'll just say the sacrifice that has to be made at the end of that movie between him and Chaz is heartbreaking. It's really heartbreaking, because he's not just that bastard. He's a human being, and this is his best friend. That was a tough one.
I need to confess something. The first time I watched it, I did cry.
Then I did my job. I did my job. And it's same thing happens to me when I write these things. If I'm involved in something really, really emotional, I might cry while I'm writing the story. I get because you have to You have to believe in these characters. You have to believe that they're real, and you have to feel what they feel, or else it's fake. So when whoever you're writing, it's Spider-Man, it's Constantine, it's Batman, whoever, they're real to me when I'm writing them, and what they're feeling, I'm feeling at the same time, and I'm pouring a lot of myself into them. So yeah, I'm glad that the story touched you, because one thing I didn't want, it had to be a really good creepy horror movie because it's Constantine, but you also wanted it to be something that touched you, and I'm glad that it did both.
Yeah. Sorry.
It's okay.
I changed yet I changed the topic and then come back to what I wanted to say because English.
It's okay. Take your time.
Um, why is Justice League Dark movie an original idea? It isn't based on anything from the comics.
Yeah, and it's funny because the Justice League Dark movie, I only worked a little. I worked a little. Ernie Altbacker did most of the work on that, but I was working on the original story that we started working on, and I actually pitched them something that we had just done in the Justice League Dark comics. We had done a big epic crossover with this character Blight, and I thought this would be a really great epic story. And for whatever reason, they didn't want to do it, and we just started bouncing ideas around. But they did not want to do an adaptation. A lot of what they do with these things, what they did with the animated shows too, is they'll take little elements. They'll take characters that they love and develop them. They'll take one little aspect of this story and they'll develop them. It's a very collaborative thing. When I'm writing comics, it's very much my vision. When you're working with TV and film, it becomes much more of a group vision. So you're working with the producers and you're bouncing ideas around, and you're building stories together. So I don't know why they decided that they wanted something original as opposed to an adaptation. But you don't want everything to be an flip side. You don't want everything to be an adaptation. It's fun to do something original. That's why even with the Constantine thing, yes, it was an adaptation, but I added a lot of stuff that was new that hadn't been seen before. So this way, if you're a comic book fan and you've read the story, when you come over to see the movie, you're getting something else, not just a direct translation of the story. Because if all you're doing is translating the story beat for beat, then you might as well just read the book.
Yes, I feel the same. I don't get why an adaptation needs to be one-to-one what the comic book was or the book. It's much better to read the original source than watch a movie that's basically the
Right,
same.
right. You want the two things to sort of shine a light on each other. One adds to the other. And sometimes if it's done right, then you have these two stories that in your imagination come together and they make one bigger story between the two of them.
I know. Or I understand. And have you seen the Justice League Dark movie?
Yes.
Okay.
The first one, you mean? I've seen the first one. I haven't seen the second one. I saw it a while ago, so I don't necessarily remember everything, but I saw it.
Okay, but I had a conversation with a friend, and we were debating who was the main character, Batman or Constantine.
That's a good question. I think it depends on your perspective. I think, quite honestly, for commercial reasons, Batman has to be in a lot of these movies because people will pay the money for Batman. That's why it was so great with the Constantine movie that we just got to do Constantine, and got Matt Ryan to do the voice. How fantastic! But I think that the movie was probably a little, from what I remember, was a little bit more weighted to Batman. But I, in my mind, probably Constantine should be the central figure, not Batman in a movie of Justice League Dark.
Yes.
We agree on everything.
What is your favorite comic book from your childhood, if you remember?
Wow. Can I single out a favorite? I can single out a few favorite comics. For I as a kid, I was in love with the original Marvel comics of the '60s, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Fantastic Four, Thor. Jack Kirby. If I had, as opposed to picking one one comic, I'll pick one creator from my childhood, and that's Jack Kirby. What he did at Marvel in the 60s with Stan on Thor and Fantastic Four and co-creating all those other characters, but Thor and Fantastic Four especially were just comics with the kinds of stories that had never been seen before. And then when he went to DC and did the New Gods, which are probably my favorite comics of all time, I love those comics. I reread them periodically, and they're just fantastic. There are very few people, if any others, that I can think of in the history of comics that I would call a genius. I think Jack Kirby was a genius. I think he benefited certainly from his collaboration from Stan. They brought out the best in each other. But that stuff that he did on his own was also amazing. I was also recently looking over, he did the Eternals. He created the Eternals at Marvel. And in like a year, and the book only lasted a year and a half, he created enough characters and concepts in a year and a half. They could have started a whole other comic book company just based on what he did in a year and a half. That's the kind of imagination he had. He was an extraordinary, extraordinary talent. And by all accounts, a very nice man as well. So when I think of my childhood, but when I was a kid reading comics, I just loved comics. I loved them all. I just loved reading comics, I'll say another favorite of mine from when I was a kid was the Silver Surfer. The original Silver Surfer comic that Stan Lee and John Buscema did, especially the first half a dozen or so issues. Loved those comics and still love that character. And of course, all of the Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and then at DC, Justice League, Swamp Thing, Superman, Batman. I love comics, so I love all those characters.
Yeah, I don't really get the Marvel versus DC vibes.
Oh yeah, I mean one against the other? No, I didn't know. There's just great stories. Enjoy them all. The idea that like I read Marvel and I won't read DC, or I read DC but I won't read Marvel, it's silly. Read it all. Have fun.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. If you had an advice for young writers, what would it be?
Well, first of all, I'm looking and seeing we have 2 minutes and 43 seconds left here.
Yes.
Do you want to sign out and sign back in, and so we can talk a little bit more?
We could do that.
Because otherwise I'm going to be in the middle of a sentence and we're going to get cut off anyway.
Yeah.
So let's do that. I'll sign right back in, okay?
Okay.
All right, bye.
Bye.
And we're back.
Yes.
So your question was, if I remember correctly, advice for people who want to be writers?
Yes.
Someone just asked me this the other day, and it's the same answer I always come up with. You need a certain kind of nervous system to be in the arts. You have to be really passionate about what you do, and you have to really, really love it. And Joseph Campbell, a famous writer, and I guess you'd call him a philosopher, said, follow your bliss. I say, follow your passion. Follow the things in your life that you're really, really passionate about. Because they may not lead you where you expect to go, but if you follow them, they'll always lead you someplace good. So I always say, it's like, well, my passion is saying I want to go 2 miles that way. So I'm going to go that way and try that career path. And along the way, you run into a wall. You can't go forward. You make a right, and there's a door there. You open the door, and there's a whole aspect of your career that you never saw before. But you got there because you were following your passion. So that's really important. And the other reason why it's important is because in the arts, no matter how successful you are, there's always rejection. Half the time you're selling things, and half the time people have 100 million reasons to say no to you. And it's difficult. So I always say you have to have, for the rejection part of it, you need a thick skin and a really hard head, because you're going to be running into brick walls a lot and people slamming doors in your faces and saying no. So I always say when you get those rejections, you have to feel it. Go crawl under your desk, bang your head against the wall, shake your fist at God and curse him, and then take a deep breath, come out and start writing again and start writing something new, because if you can't deal with rejection, then you can't be in the arts, because it's just part of what it is. If you're out there, trying to be a writer or an artist or a musician or an actor or a poet, whatever it is, there's always rejection. But the rewards are really so great, because if you get to make your career doing the thing that you love, there's a lot of people in the world that have worked their whole lives doing something that makes them miserable. How lucky. I feel so fortunate that I've had a chance, even on the worst day, to be doing the thing that I love.
Yeah, that must feel great, actually, to
Yeah, it
do the
is.
thing, to do the
It
thing
is.
that you want.
It is.
What is your favorite part of writing?
That's a great question also. My favorite part, I'll tell you what exactly what my favorite part of writing is. My favorite part is when from out of nowhere, it's like all this stuff brews in our unconscious mind. And it's cooking around back there. We're not even aware of it. And so it may be some morning I'm laying in bed and all of a sudden, the way a lot of ways sometimes stories come to me, it's like I see movies in my head. And I'm laying in bed and all of a sudden the story starts to unfold in my mind like a movie, like a hologram. And I'm watching it the way an audience would watch a movie, like, I didn't know that. Really? Oh, that's really interesting. Oh, really? And then the trick is to run to the computer and try to write this movie down in my head. So the moments when the unconscious takes control, when I feel like I'm not doing this, I don't know where this story is coming from. I don't know where these characters are coming from. It feels like it's coming from another dimension and it's being channeled through me. That to me is the most magical part of writing because even after doing it all these years, I don't understand it. It's just like someone taps me on the head with a magic wand and this movie starts coming out of my head. It's magical and it's exciting. And then the hard part is trying to get it down and then to edit it. It's like suddenly this tree grows magically. Wow, I don't know where this tree came from. But then you have to get to work pruning the tree. Well, that's an extra. We don't need all those extra branches. Oh, there's too many leaves here. Oh, we need to cut it down. It's a little too tall. It might fall into the house. So that's where your conscious mind comes in, where you have to like really shape and edit the work. But the really magical part is when you're unconscious. Oh, I'm really stuck in the middle of this story. I don't know what to do. And I go for a drive. And all of a sudden, the whole scene that I'm missing just appears. How did that happen? Where did that come from? I don't know. I don't want to know. Go home and write it. It's really exciting. It's really magical and fun.
Okay, it sounds fun.
It is. It really is. Are you a writer?
I am trying to be one. I'm writing some stuff, and yeah,
That's
mostly for
great.
myself.
Well, you always start out writing for yourself. I was writing, for myself for years before I ever attempted anything professional.
Uh, do I have to have a degree to be a writer?
No, no. That's the thing about the arts, which all you need is the will and the talent. Now I majored in English. I read great literature. I immersed myself in the arts, but that I certainly didn't. No one asked me getting into comics. Do you have an English degree or anything like that? Have you studied creative writing? They just want to know: is it good? Is the work good? Are you good at what you do? Same thing. A musician doesn't have to have gone to the Berklee School of Music to study music. Here's a song I wrote. Good, bad, or indifferent. Here it is. If it's good, you'll get you in the door. If you can play well, you don't have to have studied guitar for 20 years. You just were playing and you're a good guitarist. Same thing with writing and art. It's helpful to study, to expose yourself to great writers and great writing. And I think the other thing that's really, really important is to be unafraid to put yourself into the work, to put, all, your deepest thoughts, your deepest feelings, your deepest fears, your deepest hopes, all into the work. I always say a writer has to be shameless. You have to put all of yourself into your work.
I try to do that.
That's great. That's great. So you're still in school?
Yes, I'm still in school.
And so how old are you?
Almost 20.
Almost 20. Okay. So you got plenty of time. You got plenty of time. But you have you have to be passionate about it and you have to do the work. A lot of people, I've had people come to me and say, I want to be a writer. Well, what have you written? Nothing. But I think about it a lot. That doesn't work. You have to sit down and you have to do the work.
Yes. I have written some stories there somewhere at my on my tablet, on my phone. Some of them were read by people. Some of them by people I know, others by complete strangers. And most of the time I got positive feedback.
That's great. That's great. Well, just keep doing it. Ray Bradbury, the great Ray Bradbury, I think when he was a kid, when he started, when he was maybe a teenager, he used to write a short story every day. I mean, every day he'd write a new one. And as he said, I'm pretty sure what he said was most of them were just terrible. And then one day, it's like going to the gym and building muscles. You know what I mean? You're building those muscles up and you feel like, oh God, nothing's getting accomplished. And one day you look down and you got these muscles that you didn't have before. And by writing, continue, you don't have to write a short story every day, but just to regularly write, you're building up your creative muscles. And you're also, without even realizing it, exercising your unconscious mind, which will then surprise you with these wonderful things,
Yes. Thank you for the advices.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I sometimes do writing workshops and I work one-on-one with writers, and it's really fun. It's always fun to interact. I've been doing this a long time. So to share whatever wisdom I have with writers who are newer to the game is really fun for me. And then I always learn something from them in return. So it's a great thing.
Yeah. One question I had, it's a bit creative one. If you had anything you could choose, something original you came up with, some characters that's already known, or mixing up franchises, what would you do?
Oh, so like what's my dream story, basically?
Yes.
Yeah, probably at this stage, I've gotten to write just about, if not everything, most of the Marvel and DC characters, but I've also done a lot of my own original stuff over the years. And like I've just had this novella that came out. I have a new novella coming out in the summer. So writing original stuff. I'm enjoying working in prose right now, but I still love comics. We just did a Kickstarter called the DeMatteis, where I launched 5 new series through this Kickstarter. So that was a real thrill to get 5 of these ideas that I've had in my head for years out into the world. So I'm always, whatever it is, I'm always, rather than one specific thing, I'm always looking for the next challenge. There are times over the years where I thought, all right, I've done all this comic book stuff. I don't need to ever do a comic book again. And then all of a sudden someone offers me a gig or I have an idea and off we go again. And I'm excited again. So it's whatever the next story is what excites me the most, I think.
Okay. Can you tease the novella that will come out?
Tease what?
A little tease your novella that will come out in summer.
Okay, so first I'll tell you about the one that came out last June is called The Excavator. And I don't know if it's available in Europe. I know if you go, there's this website called Neotext Corp, C-O-R-P, neotextcorp.com. They're the publisher. It's available through Amazon as both an ebook and physical book. I'm hoping that it would be available in Europe as well. And it's sort of like a supernatural thriller. And the new one that comes out next summer is called The Witness. Very different kind of story, but also with that supernatural element in it. I mentioned the Twilight Zone before. It's those kind of stories where you've got a regular person living a normal life, and then suddenly something happens that makes them realize that the world is a lot weirder than they thought, and then off they go on an adventure, and hopefully an interesting one that's kind of, as we talked about with Constantine, that reveals something about us as human beings. So the excavator story starts, this woman wakes up one morning and she sees a child at the end of her bed. She's never seen this child before. And at first she thinks she's dreaming, but then the child comes crawling into her bed. She freaks out. She pushes the kid out of the bed. The kid starts to cry and says, "Mommy, why have you done that?" And her husband wakes up and what's going on? Well, it turns out this child is her son, but somehow all her memories of her son have been excavated from her mind. She has no memory of her child. And then she gets a message on her phone saying, pay us this much money and we'll return the memories of your son. And if you don't pay us, we're going to take your daughter next. And that's the beginning of that story. So very, very happy with that story and very exciting. And yeah. And then the one that's coming out, I can't, because it hasn't come out yet. I don't want to say too much. about
Yes.
it. So I'll let that be a mystery until the book is released. But if for comic book fans, the illustrations, they all have about 10 illustrations in them from these wonderful artists. The first one is by a wonderful artist from Greece named Vasilis Godzilis. He did The Excavator, and for The Witness, the 10 illustrations will be done by J.H. Williams III. If you're an Alan Moore fan, you probably know him from Alan Moore's Promethea, but he's done Batwoman at DC. I mean, he's a phenomenal artist. So he's going to illustrate the new novella, and so that's very exciting.
That's awesome. Uh, I I want to read your previous novella from last year. It sounds exciting.
Oh, good. I hope it's available over there. You should be able to get it, at least as an ebook, I would hope,
If
And if
it's not,
you, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if you go to neotextcorp.com, they have either a big chunk or the whole thing that you can actually read online at their site if you can't get the book through, Amazon in Germany. So one way or the other, I think you should be able to read it.
I mean, I could always ship it. That there are some books that came out only in the US, and I ship them over
Oh,
here.
okay. Okay. Well, I hope you read it and that you enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I have about 10 minutes left and then I have to be on my way. So
Okay.
whatever questions you have, let's get get them all in.
To be honest, I think that's all.
Oh,
I
that's great. So perfect timing. Perfect timing. So
I will.
go ahead.
Yeah. I didn't. I have some. I had some more. If you would be in any way affiliated with the adaptations of your work that's coming next. But yeah, you did.
I don't understand the question.
It's
What I
it's
what
not
I
a
what
question.
what I what I want to what we talked about before about adapting my own work.
No. I meant if you were it. Those questions were. I would ask those questions if you were affiliated with, for example, the Creature Commandos adaptation.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah. No, actually, James Gunn is writing all those himself, from what I've read. He's writing the whole show himself.
Yes, all 7 episodes.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe if they do a second season, I would love to get a chance to work on it. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yes. Oh, that would be also fun to watch.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very excited to see what they do with it. Very excited. All right. Well, if you haven't got anything else, or you have one last question, a final question to wrap it up.
A final question. Is there any Did you write a movie that will come out in like the next 10 years?
Did I write one?
Yes.
There are a couple of things brewing right now that I can't talk about. And when you're dealing with Hollywood and movies, you never know. Deals are in process and all this stuff happens. Sometimes they get made, sometimes they don't. But I have a couple of things that are really, really interesting going on right now that I'd love to tell you about, but I can't. But maybe in the next few years, you'll get to see them both.
Okay.
How's that?
That's great.
Okay, good, good. I'm glad. I'm glad. What's fun about this is in recent years, I've done a lot of international conventions. I've gone to other countries, and as I always say, I'm most of my time I'm working alone in my office, me and my imagination, my imaginary friends, and then to go out and go to other countries around the world and realize that there are people all over the world that have either read these stories or watched these movies and TV shows, and it's meant something to them, that you could tell me that you watched the Constantine movie and it touched your heart and it made you cry, or that you watched the Death Short over and over and over again. That's a great thing. What a wonderful thing. And how wonderful that we have this technology that you and I can sit here. I'm in New York and you're in Germany, and we can have this conversation. It's fantastic.
Yes, it is.
Really, really is. So thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you for your time.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it. And any comic book fans over there that are watching this, greetings, and thank you all for reading and watching and enjoying the work.
Uh, Again, thank you so much for agreeing to this.
My pleasure.
It is a big pleasure uh, uh, to talk with someone that's actually pretty well known in the industry.
Well, I was happy to do it. So take good care. And so does this going to end up on YouTube? Is that where it ends up?
Yes, it will be
Yeah.
on YouTube.
All right. So you let me know when it's up. Okay.
I will. I will.
Okay, great. Thank you. Really, really fun to talk to you. Take good care. Bye.
Bye. Have a
Bye
nice
bye.
day.
You too. Enjoy your day.
Thank you. You too.